Hi, welcome to this video. My name is Daryn Zubke and I'm a huge fan of the French Bassoon. This old instrument in no way represents the sound of modern French bassoon players. If you're interested in hearing some amazing musicians who play the French bassoon professionally, just pause this video and search any of these names on YouTube. You will not be disappointed. I listen to them all the time. For the purposes of this video, I'm talking about the fingering differences. And even though this instrument is very old, more or less the standard French bassoon system is close enough on this instrument compared to the modern ones. And I do own another French bassoon, but it has German key work. So the fingerings on that instrument, it's got basically a French body, but German keys. So I can pretty much play the French bassoon sound on that instrument. But still, I'm just really curious and fascinated by the French system, and I thought maybe you are too. I mean, after all, you did click on this video. So I may not be a professional French bassoon player, but based on how often I listen to these musicians, I would say I'm a professional fan of the French bassoon. So let me show you some interesting things about this instrument. So one fingering that's quite a bit different between the German system and the French system is middle E. So in the staff in bass clef, that E, you're used to playing just whisper key and the first tone hole on your left hand, but on the French system you actually have to add your right thumb on the low E key. But the thing is, there's actually no key on a French system. It's just a hole. So it resembles, if you've ever seen a Baroque bassoon, it's just a single hole there. So if you don't do that, if you don't add that E at all times, it's actually going to sag to an E flat. So it just, because of the acoustics of the instrument, that's a requirement with this fingering. So it gets a little bit confusing, especially when things are a little bit fast. But you know, after learning it for a few weeks, you actually get kind of used to it. Another thing that you can use as an alternate, if the fingering is not to your liking or just confusing, you could substitute that with the third finger, so the third spatula that you would use like for low G. So you either have to have the low E covered or the right hand third finger. One significant difference of the French key system compared to German is where the whisper key is located. So some specialized German bassoons have that added key. They call it a French whisper key. It's located below the C sharp. But this is actually inspired by the default on the French key system. You can see that the whisper key on the French system is located where a German system low C sharp is located. French bassoonists will hold this key down when a note is in the lower octave. Basically, whenever you would use your left hand thumb on the German bassoon, your whisper key. You'd instead use your left hand pinky on the French bassoon. Here's an example of when to use the left hand pinky whisper on the French bassoon. Some German bassoons have an A bridge added to them for resonance and intonation. So like when you would press down the A flick key, it would close the whisper key. Well, on French bassoon, all of the vent keys, all of the flick keys that are operated by the left thumb actually enable the whisper key whenever they're pressed. And actually, when a French bassoonist plays an A, a B flat, a B, a C, or a D, those tenor notes that you always flick, the mechanism automatically enables the whisper key as well. Unlike German bassoons, where where you're advised to flick or tap these keys, the French system requires you to hold the key for the entirety of the note. This helps with resonance and intonation, and it cannot be excluded except for very, very fast passages. Let's go back to the example and I'll show you what I mean. There is an alternate whisper key on the French bassoon, but it's only used to maneuver passages including a middle C sharp or D flat. I'll talk about this in the next section. One of the most confusing things that I've had to deal with learning this full French system is this the C sharp key that's operated by your pinky. So it's like when do you switch to the alternate octave key? Like how many notes before you play the C sharp and how many notes after the C sharp? So just in casual conversations, no formal lessons, the answer I get is that you just kind of use your common sense and whatever works for you. So really the idea of when to use that alternate whisper key kind of depends on however long you want to use it on a note before the C sharp comes up. Otherwise, you're going to be shifting between these two, between the octave key and the C sharp key. And since this instrument is so old, there's not rollers in between them. Modern ones have them, so it's probably a little bit easier for them. But when I'm practicing scales on this, I really have to plan ahead. I usually switch to the alternate whisper key 2 notes before, if it's at sort of a moderate tempo. You might think that it is quite a burden to have to play your C sharps with your pinky, but there are a couple instances where it actually is a little bit more fluid in the technique. It's a little bit easier. And one of those examples I find is, the reason I chose it, is in the Marriage of Figaro when you're going quickly from D to C sharp. It's a little bit easier than coordinating your thumb pressing 2 keys if you have the lock on. Sometimes with my students I call it a thumb smash, like if they're just really beginning, like maybe high schoolers. But pressing 3 keys with your thumb, it seems normal to a German bassoonist, but it's like, is that any more ridiculous than having a C sharp as your pinky? I don't know. It's just 2 different systems. But yeah, you can hear me play Marriage of Figaro, and you can hear that it's a little bit easier to use in quick passages, having that C sharp in your pinky. Another major difference between the German and French key system comes when comparing the B-flat fingerings. The French system does not have the same thumb B-flat spatula as the German system. The French system relies solely on what German players know as the alternate or trill B-flat. So the French system has been engineered very well to have both the 3rd finger play G and the B-flat key. You'll see that the maker, this one is Buffet Crampon, has put them close together with a saddle spacing, along with 2 really important roller keys. And just a quick note, my bassoon is so old that the screws are actually rusted in and the rollers don't even work. Whenever you play a B-flat on the French bassoon, you must use this fingering, because you don't have a choice to use your thumb. So because of acoustics and intonation, it's also very important to cover the low E hole when playing these notes as well. This can create some finger shifting that might seem very awkward to a German bassoonist. See this example. So in fast passages, you may not always be able to go quickly, even though there are nice rollers here and it's kind of engineered in a way that it's sort of a saddle. You know, it's operated by just your one key. You actually will need to use an alternate fingering, which is 1, 3, and also that low E key. So that's a forked B flat, and you can use it in the low register or the upper one. And it comes up. The reason I chose Ravel Piano Concerto, I'm not playing it as fast as it should be because I can't. But in fast passages, going between G and B flat, you're not going to be able to shift your third finger fast enough. So you do use a forked fingering. And actually, if anybody has any experience with the oboe fingerings, it would be their F fingerings. So they have 3 Fs actually. A forked F, which is this alternate B flat for us. A right hand F, which is where this would be located. They shift their fingers. I don't think they have rollers. And then they have an additional left F over here, but French bassoon doesn't have that. So it's not too far out of the imagination that you could do a forked B flat on the bassoon, just as you can with the oboe. So in the Ravel Piano Concerto, you have to use that forked B flat. And normally, if you use a forked B flat, the intonation is not as good, it's not as strong, and the pitch is very bad. But if you're going very, very fast, like in Ravel, you kind of don't really notice. I mean, you might notice a little bit, but since it's fast, you can kind of get away with it. I had a hard time finding a good example from an etude or orchestral work for this, so I'll just play a chromatic scale for the low range. Actually, that's not true. I had a good example from Tchaikovsky 5, where you're playing really fast triplets, down, descending into the low range, but I have to be honest, I couldn't learn it. Even like with practicing a lot every day for a month, I couldn't figure it out. Where did the low C sharp go? Where did the low E flat go? Well, they're actually operated by your left thumb here. So the E flat key is there and the C sharp key is there. So it really does change the technique of your low range. And even though it kind of blew my mind at first, because on my Ducasse bassoon it doesn't have this arrangement. It's got a regular, E flats there and C sharps there. But actually, after practicing this for a while, for a few weeks or whatever, it actually is pretty efficient. I mean, I have a hard time going to the low C sharp key, playing low C sharp, but everything else is a little bit easier than I would have imagined originally. So it's actually a pretty good setup with having those low notes, those low keys operated by your thumb, even though it kind of looks like, did the bassoon really need more thumb keys? Well, the French bassoonists think so. So the action for the low B flat is different. You'll see that on the French bassoon there's actually a single key here, whereas German bassoon has 2 spatulas there. And that's because of, on the bell, the stationary position of the B flat pad is closed, whereas on German bassoon it's always open. So it changes the technique a little bit, changes the acoustic of the instrument as well. But in order to play a low B flat, you just play this top B flat key, and then to play a B natural, you press this little thing above the C key. So even though the C is pressed down when you're playing this low B flat key, there's an additional sort of key hovering above it that doesn't go down until you press it down, and that gives you a low B. This fingering, it's actually only specific to this old model. So modern French bassoonists don't have to deal with this, what I'm calling an open F sharp, which is just fingered on the right hand, 1, 2, 3, low F, and then whisper key. So on modern buffet crampon instruments, you can actually play it just like a German bassoon where you have a half hole. And actually on my Dukas bassoon, you can do that as well. So maybe this isn't that interesting to include, but at least on this instrument that I have that I'm playing for you, you'll notice that that's why the F sharp sounds crazy. I didn't really go into intonation very much in depth. I thought about it. But really, what it comes down to is that when you go from one instrument to another, the scale is just always going to be different. So if you played a Puchner and then you move to a Heckel, the scale is going to be different as well. So it'll take you a while to get used to it. Now, it's not as extreme going from a German bassoon to a French bassoon, but the principles are still the same. You just kind of have to practice your long tones and use your tuner a lot. The one thing that in the beginning, or I guess continually, I find a little bit frustrating is that the pitch tendencies can be opposite directions. So take, for example, open F on my German bassoon. It's very high, so I have to really like open up. And on this old buffet crampon, like 35L from 100 years ago, it's actually very flat. So just one single note as an example, two really extreme differences. And that's why I was glad that I was doing this project over winter break, because I could just kind of put my German bassoon in the closet for a little bit. And just focus on the intonation of this instrument. Because I will say, even on the Dukas bassoon, trying to practice two instruments, like pitch tendencies at the same time, is very taxing. It's a lot of work.